Good morning to you. You can see me, but I can't see you.
So I can see you. You should be able to see me, I don't think, or maybe you can in the lower.
I only see myself and the whatever you're showing there, the audience too.
Gotcha.
Okay. I guess I could share too. I decided to do this outside, and I feel really. But there's basically not a cloud really above me. I'm not sure what it's coming from. I wonder if I have to move. Probably not. Probably okay. Everybody, we're about to start soon. 3 minutes.
Looks like I'll have to figure out how to resolve that next time. Don't say anything bad about your constituents yet.
For the world, the history of mankind up to this point. Those wonderful, adoring people.
Being an activist, but what do you say to your critics?
Again, you're being an activist. I am not.
That's not appropriate, sir.
Who are you with? What's your name?
That's an appropriate question for you to ask. You're
going to ask how many questions? You get 3?
You're a stupid son of a bitch.
Good morning, Liberty lovers, Liberty curious, and anyone else tuning in to Friendly Fire this morning. And if you're watching live, then especially a thank you for tuning in so early. Turns out there's some critics of an early morning show. This show is dedicated to interviewing libertarian candidates running for office, and only libertarian candidates. As the name suggests, candidates will be asked some tough questions. But as a fellow libertarian, I'm not here to make them look foolish. I'm only raising the bar for interviewing candidates and the expectation for candidates. The Libertarian Party is the third largest political party in the United States and the only viable option to compete with the big two. So if we're going to compete, then let's do so at all levels, be it candidates, party leaders, and yes, even our podcast. In this episode, the first of Friendly Fire, I bring on Hector Roos, who is the Libertarian Party gubernatorial candidate for Florida. You may have seen him on Swampcast podcast or Liberty Lockdown. Both touched on both episodes. He touched quite a bit on his criticisms of Ron DeSantis, the current governor of Florida. In those shows, Hector made his case for why DeSantis wasn't as good for Florida as many believe, and why the Libertarian Party should run someone regardless. I'll link to those shows in the show notes. But to keep it fresh, we're going to work off the assumption that he should be running and focus on discussing his plan to disrupt the status quo. So now with that, let's go ahead and bring Hector in. Hector, good morning. How are you?
Good morning to you, and happy Independence Day to everybody who's tuning in today.
Absolutely.
This is not only
wonderful.
America's birthday, but it is the birthday for freedom, for a liberal democratic society that is made for the people, and not and certainly not the rule of kings, despots, or otherwise a special caste of leaders that you are simply born into.
Absolutely. So even though I said, even though I said we're going to work off the assumption that you should be running, because I actually agree with you that we should, the Libertarian Party should run candidates, as many candidates as they possibly can. But for anybody that's maybe not heard the other two episodes where you kind of went into depth about it, just kind of give us your couple minute pitch and say, hey, here's who I am, here's why I'm running, kind of give us your elevator pitch on this.
All right. So first and foremost, I sit on the state board of the Libertarian Party of Florida. I'm one of those people who actually became a libertarian because I was first a Republican, in all honesty, and this was thrown off essentially when I realized the Republican Party didn't represent any longer. They certainly gave a lot of lip service to the idea of freedom and personal liberty, but when push comes to shove, we have far more. They have far more in common these days with communists than they even do with Democrats. So, with that said, it was a personal call for me to run for governor, but in particular, as a member of the state board, it was also personal responsibility that since Florida has such easy ballot access, pretty much all you have to do is sign a check.
Mm-hmm.
Then it was our responsibility to actually have someone to run. And in fact, I'm the chair of the candidates committee for the LPF, in charge of recruitment, in charge of facilitating candidates, and ultimately we still have another great statewide candidate in Dennis Missigoy running for U.S. Senate, but we didn't have one at the state level.
Mm-hmm.
And we certainly need to always pursue whatever we can to enjoy our ballot access. I firmly believe that our candidates are our number one recruitment funnel for the party. It brought me into it. It may have brought you into it, but frankly, most people who came into the Libertarian Party came in because they met a candidate who was a libertarian running for office. And if we want to grow the party, it is a must to participate in the electoral process, in the public debate, and push our ideas forward, which we're not doing enough of. So this isn't simply a protest. This is not a protest campaign. This is one where, this a serious one where we can actually do good and actually and try to win this one. If everybody was complaining before, a lot of people were complaining about the Sanders before, not on his policies, but on his politics, that he might actually leave to go run for president in 2024.
Mm-hmm.
I'm fully expecting that as well. And I
Okay.
believe that we should have a libertarian in 2024 lined up. And I will also step up to do that.
Got it. All right. So you're prepared. And I hope you are prepared for today's questions that I have for you. Just so people know, Hector and I are friends. He's a good guy. I actually support him for his run for governor here. But we're going to set that aside and we're going to ask some tough questions here. And depending on his answers, I may even have to push back a little bit, but that's okay because that's part of the job of being governor, right? Like, hey, prepare now for the job that you want later, so on and so forth. So let's get into it. A lot of people might be surprised to learn that Florida previously had a candidate run for governor for the Libertarian Party. Back in 2014, Adrian Wylie ran as the Libertarian candidate. Now, I'm not terribly familiar with Adrian Wylie. I didn't come into the party till around late 2017, somewhere around there. But at the time, Rick Scott was the Republican candidate, and he beat out Democrat candidate Charlie Crist. And that was 48.1% to 47.1%. Now, Wylie rolled in with 3.8% of the vote, much higher than Joe Jorgensen, who only in 2020, who only had 1.18%, and Gary Johnson in 2016 who brought in 3.29%. Now, those two people that I just mentioned, for anybody that's listening who doesn't know their names, they were the presidential nominee for the Libertarian Party. So those numbers are for their presidential run. So I'm kind of, I'm not really comparing apples to apples here exactly, but I thought it was very interesting when I looked up to find out that Adrian Wylie as a governor got 3.8%. That was a pretty good jump, a pretty good number. So Hector, to you jumped in here just this last June, like barely a month ago, not even a month ago, like half a month ago. And you have less than 5 months before the election. Now, when I was looking up and reading about Wylie, I saw that he formally declared his candidacy in 2013, January of 2013. And then he officially qualified a year and a half later in June of 2014. And during that time was invited to two gubernatorial debates. So do you think you can do as well as him or better than what Adrian Wylie did?
I can never replace Adrian. Adrian is a great guy.
Right.
He is. If he also has his own podcast, he is still dropping truth bombs out there. And the point is that I believe that people are even more frustrated than they were when Adrian was running.
Okay.
And I believe conditions in Florida for conditions in quality of life, cost of living issues, bread and butter issues that voters really care about. First, when they don't think about the surveillance state, they don't think about wars of aggression. They're not thinking about the war on drugs in particular. They're thinking about the things that put food on the table first. That's their priority. And I think people are in Florida. I think Floridians are desperate. I honestly, this is the same Florida. This is the same Floridians that voted in. They'll vote in property tax caps and limitations. And on the other hand, they'll vote to approve minimum wage laws at a constitutional statewide referendum basis. This is a people who clearly have two different ideas, but there's still two different approaches that they're approving, all about the same thing. They're desperate and they want help for their cost of living issues. So can I think I can improve? I believe yes, but it won't be a factor because I'm going to do anything special. It's going to be a factor because people are sick and tired of the non-solutions, the lack of attention to the bread and butter issues that voters really care about, from the two parties.
Gotcha.
Particularly from Republicans, of course.
Now, I tend to believe that when a Libertarian candidate runs, even if they don't run the next time, if another Libertarian candidate runs, that basically we build upon whoever ran before us. Right. And do you think that 2014 and then 2022 is too big of a gap for you to really kind of capitalize on the idea that, hey, there's a Libertarian candidate, let's check him out? Or do you think that doesn't really matter just because of the situation?
I think we live in interesting times, to quote a Chinese proverb. I think that there's no comparison between the country that we lived in, the state we lived in 2014, and the state and the country we live in 2022. We've gone through 475 days of emergency declaration by the governor in this state. We've continued to see the community push back against co-parenting model by the government in terms of where the government here in Florida, particularly the school boards, are arguing that they should have the last say on how our children are educated in Florida. These are things that we would think are more Maoist or more present that in other countries. Remember, liberty is not a liberty, and a Republican form of government is very rare in the world today. This issue is, and so we are seeing a serious challenge. Today is, America's Independence Day. We threw off kings. We revolted against taxes, and to say that things are we can compare the things of 1776 to 2022 is a bit of a stretch, but that comparison's there too. But certainly in 2014 to now, what has changed? Massive inflation. The idea that we've normalized the idea that Americans, and particularly Floridians, it's common that everyone has to work. People have to work 2 jobs, maybe sometimes 3 to make it. The idea that we really the idea that we can continuously hear from the media and politicians that we should be concerned more about pro-life or pro-choice stances or LGBT or something that happens in another state versus why are our taxes so high? Why our property insurance is doubling or tripling? Why is it that our property taxes themselves are another double whammy? Why is it that I'm concerned more about keeping a roof over my head? And why are politicians that I elect to represent me not concerned about it as I am? The political class in the state, not just simply in the country, is so far removed from people's daily issues that I cannot see a comparable with what's occurring in 2014. In 2014, Adrian was talking about why do we have so many permissions that we're asking local government? A classic libertarian position. He actually literally lit his driver's license on fire to prove a point and drove around for half a year until he got arrested because he was without a driver's license, right? So this was I think we're talking about way different things, way different needs in Florida today that simply are not being addressed. They're simply being ignored, and actively so. And the politicians are knowingly punting on it. They don't want to have to confront and do any actual work. And they're hoping that because Republicans have been doing so well in the polls in Florida, that the voters will just give it to them. Why? Because the other people are worse, the lesser evil, right? Argument. There's that's all they have. That's all they're relying on now in Florida.
Gotcha. So it almost sounds like the situation is such it's actually so much worse that libertarians, even if they don't do as well as a candidate, right, that they still should do well in the polls. Is that kind of what you're saying? Like, as long as we get out there and we start, making FaceTime and letting people know what we're about, that they're thirsty for it. So here we are, and we're going to see, kind of like, if you build it, he will come.
No doubt. The national polls have been trending for the last 6 years on what is it? 60% of voters in America want a third party, want another choice. So we've been hearing this. We've been hearing this slow drumbeat of more choices, not Democrat, not Republican, something that actually they can relate to or relates to them better. And we've been seeing that in major polls, consistently. So some places, between, I don't know what's more shocking, that people believe that 60% of voters in America want a third option or another option, or that 25% of them are so frustrated they would support open revolt.
Gotcha. So we just need to show up. We need to show up and do our thing, talk about liberty, and we're going to start seeing something interesting. So good. I like it. And so let's move on to a question. I've got my set of questions here, but I want to kind of jump to a question from an audience member here. Because I think it's a good question. And I didn't prepare. I prepared for, in case I didn't get any, but we have them. So we're going to ask them. So this one comes from D Dockery. Let me see if I might even be able to put it up on the screen here. I'm using a new system here. So it says, if you were governor when COVID started, would you have pushed back against Trump like Georgia tried and got ridiculed for? And then if the answer is yes, how would you have responded to the various cities? For example, Jacksonville, Duval was going against you. So how would you have responded in that particular case?
So yes, I would have resisted Trump's mandates. They were bad then. They were bad a year later when they were under Biden. And the reality is that every lockdown in the state of Florida, every measure to take away your liberties, to define you as essential or non-essential, to mask your kids and participate in this statewide program of child abuse, was the result of an emergency order placed for 475 days by Governor Ron DeSantis. Local governments have no authorization outside of that state of emergency to act the way they did, to take the actions they did. So if we don't put the responsibility where it should lie, then we are simply not having the same conversation. We're not having the proper conversation.
Right. Okay, good. So you would have pushed back on him because I think there's a lot of people that I think what happens is, at the time, people kind of make some noise, and later that noise kind of silences because they see something else that this person did that they maybe like. I think that's one of the reasons why a lot of people kind of have this good view of, like, say, Donald Trump or say Ron DeSantis, is because they walk away and they kind of forgot some of the negative things and kind of only remember the things that they actually liked about him. So.
But let me add a little bit more to that. So what we had, for example, in Jacksonville. Anybody remember that the Republican National Convention actually took place in Jacksonville?
Oh, yeah, you're right.
That year.
Yeah.
So when push comes to shove, they would suspend the rules for whatever political expediency they desired, whether it was that, whether it was UFC, whether it was, they bent over backwards to appease big business or their particular interests. That created a system of the most despotic idea that you could have rights for some and rights not for others. That's really what happened. And D actually asks another question in the chat, that why did Ron DeSantis have the state of emergency in place for 475 days? And it comes down to the money, the billions and billions of dollars in handouts from the American Rescue Plan, from the following stimulus bills that were all directed and placed in the hands of Ron DeSantis during the emergency to disperse how he saw fit. I mean, so much money was allocated to Florida that Florida has a $25 billion surplus, the highest surplus it's ever had in its history, because they just didn't find anything else to spend the money on. So instead of rebating it to everybody, which probably would have been better, or using it as to reduce taxation, he said, we're just going to keep it in reserves, even though we have no need for it.
Gotcha.
So that's in other words, he didn't have to go to the legislature to spend the money. He simply did it by fiat. His signature and billions of dollars in non-competitive bids later. That's what generated 475 days. We only got rid of 475 days after the blue state started fully reopening, and he went, "Oh, the jig is up."
Gotcha. Speaking of money, that leads right into the next question that I have. So in one of the podcasts, and I don't remember which one it was either Liberty Lockdown or maybe it was Swampcast, you said that your intent was to raise $150,000 as a candidate, which would qualify you for matching funds. And then this was your quote. You said, "I'll be sitting on a pile of cash with the will to use it." So my question is, what does that will look like? Where does 300,000 take you in this run?
Well, the basic thing is all political campaigns are marketing campaigns. It just literally means that our brand has more money to essentially market itself, both personally and going to events. What I would do with some of that money, of course, is select cable TV buys as people are voting. Identify, the everything. Campaigns do not have to be that expensive, but they do cost money.
Sure.
Right. So we're not talking about, I don't have to pay $3 million to get on a ballot. I'm already on the ballot. I don't have to pay. I don't even have to argue with people that that I have to really get in their face and earn their vote. The other political campaigns are going to just be busy telling each other how awful the other is, right? And coast with me. I've been good for you for this. You should continue with me. I mean, that's really what they're going to be saying. But none of them are, simply each dollar that goes into the campaign will be a dollar that's used to highlight the fact that we have solutions that they've been ignoring to the problems the political establishment has been ignoring, whether the Republican or Democrat have been ignoring for people's quality of life. That will resonate with people because it's a bread and butter issue.
Gotcha. Okay. So you, it's the beginning of July 4th. And that gives you roughly 4 months. So I took a look. According to the Division of Elections, you have currently raised just over $3,000, which is a long way from $150,000. So what's your plan to raise that rest of the money in time to get the matching funds and implement your goals?
Well, it's a lot of my time that has to be invested into it. I'm going to do the classic, what campaigns do or candidates do is they phone a lot of people who may be interested in donating to them, and they don't stop until they reach their fundraising goal. On top of that, I do plan to do some crowdfunding based on single issues. People who do want to know that there are solutions to inflation issues in Florida. There are issues to different solutions, the different problems in Florida, particularly Second Amendment issues, right? Where you basically have the reason why you don't hear too much about Second Amendment issues in Florida is because you have agreement between the Republican leadership and Democrat leadership that, hey, taking people's guns away is a good idea. Let's do that. Why? Because we can get all this money from New York and LA, and even the feds are saying that we're going to pass our red flag law based on Florida's red flag laws. So, which is just basically another name for gun confiscation. Let's put it to you that way. There are, how many gun owners there are in Florida that are on licensed gun owners?
No, I don't actually.
There's over 1 million of them.
Oh, wow.
So that's those who are publicly state that they have, they've filled out the federal record. They've gone through the whole process. There's at least 1 million of them. And that is, I intend to seek support from the sportsmen, gun owners, gun enthusiasts community in Florida.
Okay. So that's your plan. And when do you have a timeline on, I mean, I know you can't, I realize that you can't say by this day, I'm going to have this much money, but do you have like a timeline that you have set for yourself to say, by this time, I want to have raised this much money. And I know that this is, this is my plan. Like, have you worked all that out yet?
Okay, September 1st. I want to have the 150 in the bank.
Okay, awesome. And then how long will it take you to get that matching funds? I mean, is that something that you can kind of put a timestamp on?
The whole point is about the matching funds is again, it's a marketing idea. If the state just decides to, cut the check a week after that or 2 weeks after that, or the campaign gets sued on its application, which happened to the last guy who tried to do it, that wasn't a Democrat or a Republican. The point is that you create the impression that we actually have our campaign is succeeding in getting to these points of of fundraising, of support. They actually have to pay attention to us because we're doing things that no Democrat or Republican no candidate that is not a Democrat or Republican has ever done.
Right. No, and I totally agree there, because I think it's kind of like that joke where they say if you don't have some haters, like, are you actually doing anything, right? And so if they're not coming after you, then are you really being effective? And so I totally agree. I'm just curious about the timeline here, because as I was listening to the podcast and as I kind of, peruse through all the different, Twitter comments, one of the things that stood out was, hey man, you're jumping into the game kind of late. And then I looked at, as that question mentioned earlier, when I looked at Adrian Wylie's timeline of when he did things, he started he had much longer run to get things going. So I was just curious, and it's not that I'm trying to get you to replace Adrian Wylie necessarily. I'm just looking and saying, all right, this is what he did. And the result was, 3.8% of the vote, which is in that particular case, the vote was so close between Rick Scott and forgot, drawing a blank on the other person, but between
Charlie Crist, the guy who's running for the third or fourth time for governor this time?
Right.
Actually, I think it might be his fifth time running.
Right, something like that. But it was so close between them. It didn't take a whole lot to potentially be the spoiler. So 3.8 is definitely, in some way, it's either we took enough votes from the Republican that he didn't have a great win, a landslide win, or maybe not a landslide, but he didn't have a very distinct win, or we took enough from the Democrat candidate so that they actually lost. And either way, I'm very comfortable with that.
Let me posit something there real quick. Do you know that in the last 12 years, no governor that has been elected in the state of Florida has actually won with a majority of the vote? We don't have majority wins in Florida. We have plurality wins.
Gotcha.
So, so that's a very important distinction. That means that as a libertarian, I simply need to have 1 out of every 3 active voters vote support in order to win.
Right.
That's really what it comes down to. I'm not trying to advocate for, hey, I need to win 100% of the vote, nor am I trying to say I need to win 50% plus 1. I need to win 33%. At 33%, I win.
Gotcha. Awesome. Well, let's move on to the next question, which kind of relates to this $150,000. So members of my own affiliate have talked to me, and they've kind of expressed a little bit of concern that by raising $150,000, you'd actually be taking what might otherwise go to local candidates, not just them necessarily, but local candidates all over Florida. And I know that libertarians do not see the free market as a fixed pie, but in some sense, our current ability to get contributions does have a bit of a limit. And I know that Duval has 3 candidates that are running right now. They'd all love, say, I don't know, $5,000 in donations for each one of their campaigns.
Sure.
So here's my question. How does your run for governor complement them rather than take away from the various candidates? And by them, I mean not just the 3, but all of them
Sure.
in Florida. How does it complement the candidate, the local candidates in Florida versus taking from them at the local level?
Well, first off, I think it's not a big, how do I say this, not to answer to their concerns, or to minimize their concerns.
Mhm.
The reality is that people who would donate to a governor candidate are not donating to a local candidate,
Okay.
right? They're also generally the people who I'm targeting or reaching out to are people who generally are not even necessarily politically active. A banner candidate that is at the top of the ticket candidate is the one that basically creates a new generation of donors, new generation of voters, people who weren't even on the radar for that on any list whatsoever that would be interested even in libertarian ideas. So we're doing this. We're starting from basically from the beginning in identifying people who could support their campaign in the first place. Something they obviously don't have the magnet draw for that kind of support. So that's what we saw with the Jorgensen campaign, which was relatively successful as a for fundraising. That list was important and turned over to the state, but to state affiliates. But otherwise, they actually show up in the public record now. That's
Okay.
that's what we get generated. Of course, we improve the brand generally. And it's not only me that does this. Dennis Missigua running for U.S. Senate does the same thing, and the same
Right.
arguments would apply to him, right? And the reality comes down to that the ones that generate the most media play, supposedly the most resources are generated out of these campaigns, are this level of campaign. We're just because we're simply casting a wider net, and we're dealing with subject matters that have much more media scrutiny and intensity of coverage.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so it's the simple answer is it's a different pool of money that you're pulling from.
Absolutely.
Okay, fair enough. This, I'm glad to have you on because some of these questions I was like, man, I don't really know the answer to either. So I think it's really great to get some of these answers out. And just I want to remind people that if you're wondering like, hey, why are you running, any of those kind of questions, look in the show notes. There's going to be links to Liberty Lockdown. That's with Clint Russell, and then also the Swampcast, which is it's a handful of guys from Florida, and Hector went on both of their shows, and they had some great conversations about why he's running, about whether or not he should be running. But I did want to kind of tap on something that I saw because I watched both episodes and I kind of took a look through some of the comments, and so my next question, excuse me, on Liberty Lockdown in the comment section. Ben Hickman made this comment. He said, quote, if Hector really cared about Florida liberty, he'd be running for city council or mayor or sheriff, end quote. So as I was listening, I recall that in Clint's episode that you had mentioned the strongest form of political power is not those who wield the pen, but who wield the bullhorn. And then in another part of it, you had also criticized DeSantis for not taking a stronger position on municipalities. Basically, that he enabled them to use his extended, the 400 and some days declaration of emergency within their own local executive orders. And I know we had that happen here. I read some of the executive orders for here in Duval and Jacksonville. And you're absolutely right when they start out by saying, whereas the governor has declared emergency, so on and so forth.
Right.
And so my question is, if the odds are more favorable for a position like mayor or sheriff, and when I say more favorable, I just mean, you got to get less, you got to get fewer votes. You got to raise less money. And then given what you said about bullhorns in counties, wouldn't some other office offer kind of like the bullhorn and some power, but for less the cost?
Right. There is, without going too lengthy on this issue, because it can get a little complicated, the reality is that first there's an assumption that there is an available office where I live that I could
Okay.
actually run for,
Okay.
right? And there isn't, right? Two, the second thing is this idea of what does simply ballot access get us, right? Just a
Mhm.
simple notion that we can put someone on the ballot. So for $5,400 or
Mhm.
less than $5,400, our campaign gets to sit on on our brand, the Libertarian
Mhm.
Party candidate gets to actually participate in an election, and
Mhm.
at when the actual poll, that is to say, the voting results come out, that that is our baseline. We have not had that we can actually take as data as reference. So where are we doing well? Where are we not doing well?
Okay.
What are the kind of demographics that are coming out to vote that are going to vote for us? Not only that, but we also get to test our issues on the broadest market possible. Our solutions, libertarian solutions for Florida, and
Mhm.
the reality you can't get that. To put it to a dollar comparison, a statewide poll for a libertarian that won't be as accurate as voters actually voting would
Mhm.
cost anywhere from $25,000 to $50,000. That's what the big boys play
Okay.
with. So to say that we're not to say that uh, it, we're not getting value out of us being on the ballot alone on a cash basis, it's clearly that we are. Then
Okay.
to actually be the marketing worth for what our for our brand to be repeated and to be discussed nationwide, actually, because this election, although it's Florida, and Florida seems to is like a bellwether state, right? They call it a
Mhm.
purple state, or they call it a swing state. The reality is that, and on top of that, the media is so thoroughly invested in Ron DeSantis that that there any threat to the persona that he's something of this COVID king or COVID Jesus for some people,
Right. Yeah.
that it would something be something that would attract people's attention, would attract eyeballs. And personally, this issue that the issues that we would contrast with the two parties on is so important that it will lay the framework for what this party can continue to do for the next cycle in 2 years. So, what value would we get out of running a candidate? It's plain to see at when as you explain it, or as I explain it, and it doesn't really get more complicated than that. It's rather straightforward.
Okay. So the basis though, the fundamental basis here is that this is, as far as bullhorns and power, the governor position is the best one for you where you are currently located. Because I
Yes,
think that was kind of like, because that was kind of like, why aren't you running for this position or that position? And, and that's a really good point. Like, is the position even available for me to run for? Right.
right.
And so, clearly the position of governor was available. And if I recall correctly, correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe on the Swamp Cast Creatures, they mentioned that there were other candidates that were, or other people that were approached first. Is that correct? Am I correct?
Absolutely. I mean,
So
there's been a
you weren't
long
the first one
conversation.
to.
No, no, no. There was a long conversation about running some a libertarian for governor. Again, we do have some of the easiest ballot access laws in the country.
Right.
So it would be a loss for us to not have candidates, have this easy access, and not have any candidates at the end of the day. But
Right.
there is certainly, yeah,
No, and I think there's a point here that people do need to realize, and maybe many libertarians do, and maybe other people don't. I don't know, but ballot access is a big deal. I remember after the Joe Jorgensen campaign, there was all kind of complaints because, in part, the percentages that Joe Jorgensen got in some states disqualified ballot access, which meant that people have to go out and get, umpteen signatures and, put in umpteen amounts of money and all that. And that's just to have the access to the ballot. Whereas I think it was like in the 90s, late 90s, I was told that in Florida, somebody really fought hard to get it to get us set up so that we didn't have to have that fight. So we continually have it. And, with the exception of Adrian Wylie, I can't think of any other name in the last like decade of a libertarian who's run for governor. And, I think it's important that while other states are fighting for it, it's kind of in a way a disservice for us not to say, look, we need to continually have somebody running because here these libertarians and other states are fighting so hard, basically blood, sweat, and tears. And here we are, just kind of like, we have the ballot access and we're not using it. So I think there's I think there's a lot of argument to actually using it. But I was just curious, as to about these other particular positions.
Right. The in Florida, we actually have it at constitutional protection. So it's actually in the Florida Constitution that guarantees the right of minor parties to participate in with ballot access immediately.
Well, that's because we
have the
love amending our Constitution for every time we have a vote.
Right. So it was amended in 1998 originally.
Okay.
It was actually it was a coalition effort back then between all the minor parties that put pressure on what we one of the first constitutional revision commissions back when, and they put it on the ballot, and so people voted for it, and it passed. Back then it only needed to pass by a majority. Now it needs to pass by 60%.
Gotcha. Okay. Next up, I got a this one's kind of like a two-part question, right? So I've got this clip from your appearance on the Swampcast. I don't know why I'm having so much trouble with that word, Swampcast podcast, right? It seems like a mouthful there. So I'm gonna play this clip. It's only like 10 seconds, so it's not very long. So I'm gonna try to play it, and bear with me as I'm getting used to using this new system here. So let's see, do that. And then
I've been a political operative. I've been a consultant in politics for 14 years. I've been in my fights, and I've won a lot of them.
Okay, you hear that? The audio come through?
Yeah, I heard it fine.
Okay, perfect. So you said you've been in a lot of fights, or you've been in some fights and you won a lot of them. So my question is, tell me about one of those fights. What fights have you won?
Let's see. I have to pick one. I've been involved in, like I said, if you saw that scene, you saw the sign that said Ron Paul for president 2008. I've been involved in politics since with campaigns since then. I work with a lot of Republicans. I work with a lot of Democrats. A lot of them have won, and I played different roles on all those campaigns. So to say that any one of them as a highlight, well, I would say that you look at let's talk about the negative stories I have out about myself.
Okay.
For instance, I've won for I've won begrudgingly to other people elections, like in small cities like Homestead in South Florida, North Miami Beach, and others. I've been involved in numerous congressional campaigns. I've won, I've certainly won of them in terms of primaries. I was just remembering now because one of those I did happen to be involved in a number of primaries where I was working against the establishment and sometimes working with the establishment. So eventually though you grow up out of it, and I think that the point is that I've had the experience. I've been on the ground. My war stories have to deal with really learning how establishment politics works at a local level and how machine politics works. And frankly, it's quite disgusting when you think about it. Things like that special interests would hire people to shoot up neighborhoods in order to depress property values or to scare people away.
Okay.
It sounds like stuff that comes out of a Western, but it's actually more like one of those old spaghetti Westerns. Sure. But it's more relevant to today than ever before when land is just so competition for land or demand for land is so high in Florida. I mean, the reality comes down to is that we've had generational politics in place in Florida for so long. So few people are actually getting involved. The cost to actually getting into political power in Florida, there's a lot of gatekeeping. In other words, I'm trying to get to. So it takes an exceptional person to even stand up and say, and not to toot my horn, but for all those people that I work with that actually won office without the support of the political establishment in their areas is good for democracy generally, for the democratic process that we have in America, in Florida particularly. So I'm very happy to say that is something that I participated in. May not agree with all the positions on the candidates I work for, but when you do make a living out of it, you have to say what's more important, right? But for the most part, I've worked especially with more non-establishment type of figures in recent years and less. I mean, I've even been a congressional intern and I've actually worked in local government myself.
Right. So what I'm not hearing here is a specific story or a specific person that you helped or a fight. It just sounded like a very long version of I've won a lot of fights. So
Oh,
is there
sure.
a specific one?
I can go down the list. So, starting memorable ones, right? Starting in one I always think back on is like 2013. I was
Wow.
I was canvassing in Liberty City, talking to both stakeholders, business owners, and then all of a sudden somebody down the street starts, ripping out an AK-47, I suppose, because it sounded like one, and shooting down the block. So, my story of campaigning early on was duck and cover,
Right.
and that's not unusual. I mean, as seen for close hand how violence and politics actually works in inner cities is
Mhm.
that was certainly a lesson. I think one of let's see, 2017 when this Marjorie Stoneman Douglas shooting happened in Broward County. I was actually working with a congressional candidate then. And I was literally taping a promo video with them when it happened, and we're all looking at our phones and seeing streams of children rushing out of their schools, and us going, are any of their campaign volunteers that work in Parkland or live in Parkland or have children in Parkland, are their kids okay? And we didn't know, right? The question of we didn't know, and the response to those events. My candidate actually won that primary. It was a Republican primary of that year. So at the end of the day, and I'm trying not to put out names because I'm running as a libertarian, so I don't want to talk about focus too much attention on Democrats or Republicans I've helped in the past with their campaigns. Let's say the more recent ones I've been involved, was memorable for me because I was. I think the biggest entrenched politics that we have is surrounding our congressional districts. We have so few of them, and they attract so much money into them. And basically, you have a establishment. You have a political establishment that tries to hand off these districts like if they could simply be handed off, right, without any say from the voters. This is who we are going to anoint as next one. The next royalty in our politics, and most members of Congress stay in there for 40 plus years, right? So that the average age in Congress is over 80, 85, something like that.
Okay, right.
So that was the more recent ones I've been involved in. We're successful in that degree, and I'm simply sit back and say, it happened.
Right. Okay. All right. So we're going a little bit long here. I don't know how you are on time. I'm doing okay. If you want to keep going, or we can start wrapping this up really quickly.
No, we can go for a couple more questions. One of the things that I pushed back on whether it was the Swamp Creatures or Clint Russell's show with the Liberty Lockdown was, let's get back to issues. Let's talk about, this is July 4th. We're celebrating a tax revolt. We're celebrating a revolution, right? What was the revolutionary idea that you could own? You can own the benefits of your labor, rather than have to be taxed by some far away, far removed, and simply a power that doesn't care about you, right? Just simply, are you paying our taxes? And if you pay them, we'll leave you alone. But in this case, this country is so far away from that model of just pay us and we'll leave you alone. That's sort of a positive extortion, because at least they'll not leave you alone, but they'll also not let other people continue to extort you either. This country, you're extorted. You pay them once, then they let other people come in and extort you, and then they let, of course, the inflation tax, which is another group of people extorting you, and then ultimately, what are we talking about? The goal of any libertarian campaign these days should be decentralization. So what do we need to decentralize? We have so many state monopolies in play that are ruining people's lives in Florida, from energy to housing to insurance. People are, arguing with me, oh, I got my description wrong on how property insurance works in Florida. No, I didn't. The reality is that we have Floridians require two types of insurance, or three types of insurance, actually. They require the windstorm or homeowners insurance. And last, which is obviously everyone has to go to the public option first, because that's the only one, the most affordable one. But as soon as they don't qualify for it, they're actually kicked out and made to go to a very expensive outside policy that will that is so prohibitively expensive. People actually, people really have to. It really harms people economically. Then on the other side, you have flood insurance. If you're in a particular flood zone, the price of flood insurance, because it's insurance covers basically the replacement cost of a home, and inflation has actually increased the value of homes so rapidly. People are actually underwater with their insurance coverage. I check your policy if I were you too. Most Floridians are surprised when a storm happens that they're actually underinsured. So that's another cost. And then of course, if you take out a retail mortgage, generally there's a PMI, a private mortgage insurance that's 2 or 3% of the entire of the mortgage value. That's another cost. So all these costs added together are either going to are putting pressure on Floridians to either sell their homes or make new housing, the purchase of new homes, unaffordable. So of course, some people who are coming in from exactly. So some people who are coming from a position of the politicians don't suffer from this. Why? Because they can always go to their buddies who will buy them out, give them a private loan that doesn't require citizens. They can basically, it's cash loans or hard money loans of that nature, and they don't actually have to suffer those issues, those additional costs. Unfortunately, we have too many politicians who benefit from that. They don't live through the same needs that average Floridians do. And I'm sorry, Benjamin, for your situation. That's a horrible thing to have to live through. Not because you couldn't, all of a sudden when you could not afford to live in the home that you've basically invest your nest egg in, your life savings, it wipes you out. It wipes you out worse. And that's the thing about COVID, right? That's the COVID response was so terrible. We're still living through the ramifications of what it's done to our community. It's savaged obviously our labor market, because we've kept kids. We've lost 2 years of child development. That is a psychological and economic cost that we're going to have to absorb down the line. And lastly, inflation. We have inflation issues in this country that are that we can minimize in Florida. When I'm governor, I certainly want to move Florida to the Bitcoin standard. I want us to be able to accept as government agencies payments in Bitcoin and start charging premiums to accept even U.S. dollars. We have to protect our, the Libertarian Party as an organization or corporation. Just this weekend has been raising money to raise money to have a reserve in Bitcoin. Why? Because any cash holdings they have are going to be rapidly devalued by inflation. So we all have to do this. The state of Florida has to move to this. Eventually, when you have a transparent form of money, and that you can see how much is in circulation, how much is truly in value to your truly out there in circulation, that we can peg to understand its value, the better for all of us. I'm trying to say, let's say another issue in Florida that people are forgetting. And by the way, the property insurance issue is a very particular and very important issue that the legislature and the governor have punted on. They've completely punted on it. So
what would you do about it?
So immediately I would call a special. So if first of all, I wouldn't lie to the public like Governor DeSantis has done. He said he declared in April that there would be a special session on property insurance, that is homeowners or windstorm insurance for citizens. There would be a special session in May. We're already in July, and it never happened. So they basically punted. And as I said at the beginning of the show, they want you to vote for them because they are the lesser of two evils, not because they're actually doing their job or even doing a decent job. They're not. They've ignored the issues. In the middle of COVID, the same cadre have raised taxes. They raised taxes at a time when Florida actually had this massive surplus that they actually could have reduced the tax burdens on people instead of raising taxes on them. So, if Governor DeSantis is listening to this, I'm going to tell him, you are being a coward for not calling a special session on property insurance, for resting your political future at the cost of people losing their homes. Coward, right? And the Republican leaderships are just as bad. They could call a special session themselves. But the reality is we've had one regular session this year and 2 special sessions in the midst of it. And they still haven't gone back to say, oops, we should have done proper insurance at some point. No, they just simply don't care because it's too uncomfortable to actually do their jobs. So as far as I'm concerned, Republicans anywhere in the state in leadership that represent any legislative leadership do not deserve re-election simply on that point alone. And not that it's saying that the Democrats have done any better, because they've been silent. They've been silent as an opposition party. They've been silent on these issues. Why? Because they frankly agree. They think it's more expedient for people to lose their homes so they can fight a battle that just simply attracts donors to them, right? And they've been an unfaithful opposition party, and Florida actually needs a proper opposition party. And I want the Libertarian Party to be that opposition party. We need an opposition party in Florida.
Totally agree, 100%. This last question, then I want to kind of jump in really quickly, and then just I ask each candidate to give me a bill that they're passionate about, that they either oppose or support, whichever, and then we'll kind of talk maybe 2-3 minutes about it or something like that. And then what'll happen is I'll wish you well, and then I'll go on to a bill review where I just basically talk about my opinion of the bill in general, not really anything related to what you say. But I did promise my friend that I would ask this question. And I'm going to keep my promise because, one, it's a promise. And then 2, because he is actually not a libertarian. This is my friend Steve that comes over on most Friday nights. He's more of a progressive type. And I almost had him come out to your cigar event when you came up here to Jacksonville over at Island Girl. But he kind of threw me for a loop. He kind of surprised me. And so he did a Google search on your name. And you had mentioned some negative stories about you. So I'm sure you know where I'm going. He found a story from the Miami Herald 2018 that suggested there was some malfeasance on your part with some mailers. So what can you tell us about that?
The people who were complaining about how I conducted business in terms of accepting cash money for my business. Okay, so they want to say that how I do business was somehow either unethical, immoral. But at the end of the day, they're just sore losers. All those people lost elections. Those people were out of power. So they would just make up anything. And the Miami Herald published a story, I think it was on New Year's Eve, when nobody was really reading the paper. They just kind of put it out there. Nobody's believed it. I was subsequently sued about it. There was an investigation on it. I've been cleared of everything. I beat them in court. The reality is that when politics can be a very ugly business, and that's another reason why people are often just discouraged from participating, and as a libertarian, we need to stand up and say, we have laws that are simply unethical. We have ways we have politicians who are absolutely corrupt, not unethical, just corrupt. They don't care about the law. And frankly, the Miami Herald, it's a badge of honor to be called anything by the Miami Herald that in a negative way, because that means you're successful. And you're successful in a way that the news media is always getting it wrong. The same news media that told us that Donald Trump was a Russian asset, or that gosh, I don't know, that cigarettes are safe for you, for generations. These are the authority figures on information, and they always get it wrong.
Okay.
So
you did send out mailers as part of your business. You did send out mailers as part of your business, and you stand behind the mailers. That you stand behind the work that you did, and the accusation for anybody so you don't have to go and look it up. I'm not going to post the link in the show notes. You can go look it up on your own if you really want. But the accusation for people that are watching was simply that you misrepresented who the mailers were coming from. And so I think if I understand the story correctly, that was the big issue, was like, hey, this union said, hey, it's got our name on it. That didn't come from us. And so that was the story, was like there was a misrepresentation. It actually had nothing to do with the content necessarily. Well, a little bit about the content, but as we know, political ads, they can get pretty rough. So like whatever.
Right. I don't need to get too wonky into it, but there is a First Amendment right to express whatever political opinion someone has.
Correct.
The reality is people who agreed with the ad didn't want to stand by it. So, that's what that is. That's on them, not me.
Okay. Fair enough. All right, so let's talk about that real quick because I know you got to get going and we got to wrap this show up. So you picked Senate Bill 7026, the Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School Public Safety Act. Now that was passed. That was passed a while back. I don't actually have the date on that when that was passed, and it's a big bill. It's 100 pages long. So just summarize your issue with the bill and what you would do about it if you were elected governor.
So this is the unfortunate result of rushing, of listening to special interests who poured $100 million into the coffers of the PACs of state leadership in that year to take advantage of a people who are suffering. What did this do? The details of it I'll say in a moment, but reality is that it broke the ability of the state legislature to represent anything that was not pro-gun control. This firmly cemented the state legislature to take that position, which we're still suffering under today. What did the bill do? All right, let's start with some of the top issues, the ones that everyone hates, which is it changed from it essentially banned personal ownership of firearms for anybody between the ages of 18 and 21. So it raised the age limit to acquire the firearms. Two, it obviously instituted red flag laws for the first time in Florida history, which simply is a form of gun confiscation, is a form where a judge without your due process in place can simply order without you even being present. Just takes a complaint that's submitted to them. It can be from anybody, realistically, and a judge can order your guns to be seized by court order. So police then have to show up to your location, show you this paper, and say, we need all your guns. Right? This is something very common in communist countries. If the people still own firearms, but this is clearly gun confiscation, and those are actually the two worst ones that come off the top of my head. This also included, somewhat this idea of arming teachers in public school, that they could participate in trainings for it. But in terms of self-defense and conceal carry in the classrooms. But the reality is that it has way more bad parts in it than it does good parts. And obviously a straight repeal would eliminate that. And I firmly do believe that public school teachers should be armed. But the reality comes down to it is that the progress we've seen in the national political sense, that the national Congress just passed, with Biden signing it this past week, a national red flag law based on the Florida standards, what they called it, is the most dangerous and insidious legislation that's ever been invented So that's where we're at with that bill.
Okay, so you would work to repeal it.
All those except the arming teachers.
Gotcha. Well, I don't think it. I think it prohibited teachers from being armed. Is that correct?
No, it did the opposite. It gave them the pilots have at the U.S. Like air marshals. It kind of allowed them to be deputized into having a firearm in the classroom, which are right now, obviously, no gun zones.
I think it excluded teachers specifically in that one, because I got that part highlighted for my portion. But I think it actually excluded teachers specifically, educators. But anyway,
right.
So wrapping it up. Oh, go ahead.
But by the way, the teachers thing, I say that broadly. So it defined who among school personnel, but somebody in school personnel could be armed. That was correct. That was there, right?
That is correct.
Yeah. So there was pushback from the school unions that couldn't be teachers. So that means anybody who wasn't a teacher could. So that means PE coaches, paraprofessionals, part-time, people who weren't classified as teachers, basically.
Right. Okay. Final words. I'm gonna let you go here so you can enjoy the rest of your day, because it's looking pretty sunny out there in Miami.
It's a little hot.
Final words.
So final words for me. So my website is roosforflorida.com, ROOS for Florida.com. Actually, you can see it right here, Roos for Florida. I'm on socials as Roos for Florida. You can continue this conversation with me on the socials there. I'm on the Instagram, the Twitter, and the Facebook, or as they call it, Meta. At the end of the day, we do have to, libertarians are and run generally to change change the political environment. Why? Because for the most part, we have a political system that responds to purely as an exchange of power to money, and unfortunately, the politicians actually sell you out specifically to have to receive both those benefits and those and money down the road. So if you actually want to resist this idea that you are an individual who's free and doesn't require permissions from a politician to live their lives, raise their children the way they want to, and certainly conduct business the way they want to, then you should vote for Libertarian, and you should vote Libertarian on every election wherever you see them on the ballot, because the reality is this is not the way Democrats and Republicans are acting will not change except through your vote. Your vote is the only thing that's going to change it ultimately, and it's even if a libertarian is not successful, they will pay attention that of enough voters showing their preference will change things. I mean, you have to remember that this was a political the power of the bullhorn is actually far stronger than the power of lawmaking. And why is that? So, this country was very close to passing a national vaccine mandate or vaccine passport, and the sudden outcry of people all over the country convinced politicians to not pursue it. And that is the type of public response that we need to see. We need to make every election, in fact, a test of whether of confidence, of an election of confidence in Republicans and Democrats. We need to make sure that every one of those of our elections does that. And on top of that, we also need to promote the ideas of liberty and libertarianism in as we run our candidates. So if you want if you want competition, if you don't want basically to be mandated to use state approved money that's based on debt, that's constantly being inflated, that is stripping you of and stealing away from the value of your savings, particularly even so. In other words, as you're taking out of your wallet, it's devaluing, right? Why should we treat our money like we should treat a car that obviously loses value 20% of its value as soon as you drive off the lot? That's what our money's doing right now. So on the other side, why should Floridians be concerned about whether they should be able to afford to stay in their homes that they've already purchased? Why? Right. Because of increase in taxes. I tell you, increased taxes, increase in property insurance. I am telling you now, the number, it's not going to be not going to be me that is going to create new libertarians. I guarantee you, this month they're going to start mailing out the proposed property tax bill for everybody in the state, all 67 counties. And when people look at the sticker shock alone, will cause more people to become libertarians than my campaign ever will. This, at the end of the day, we are an anti-tax party. So the reality is we need to own that, especially in an economic environment as we have now, right? We're of course individual rights first, but that is to say that is why we're anti-tax, right? Because we want to keep the fruits of our own labor and not have to deal with a tax man who's going to threaten us with jail, asset seizure, or the shooting of our dogs to enforce their will on us. That's what I have to say. The election for November is November 8th. And if you can support the campaign, we have a good ways to go to $150,000, and we need to get there.
All right. Well, Hector, thank you for coming on. I'm going to let you go and get into that bill review. Hopefully I was not too tough on you. I don't think I was. It sounded like you handled all of those questions very well and didn't seem to be bothered. So maybe I should be tougher next time. We'll see. Maybe we'll have you back on again and see where you are here in a couple of months. But for now, I'm going to go ahead and let you jump off, and I'm going to get into this bill review. So again, thank you for coming on. Thank you, everybody, for watching. Hold tight, because we're going into a bill review.
But I know I'll be a law someday. At least I hope and pray that I will. But today I am still just a bill.
All right. So let's get into the bill review. That's my son there, and I just figured it would be a fun little clip to have to kind of segue into a bill review. So we are going to review the bill SB 7026. So the way that I'm doing this now is when I bring on a candidate, I ask him, I say, tell me about a bill. Hopefully within their purview, but maybe there isn't one that they have readily available, but hopefully in their purview that they want to talk about. And it can be a bill that if they were in office right now, that they would do something about, or might be a bill that has already passed, in such case like this one with Bill 7026. The Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School Public Safety Act. That's a mouthful, but that particular bill has already passed, and it's okay to talk about a bill and say, hey, you know what? I think this bill should not have ever passed, and here's what I would do to try to repeal it. Or you can just talk about, a bill. Maybe they might bring up a bill from another state or another locale. Whatever the case may be, I'll take a look at the bill. Now, in this particular case, the bill is over 100 pages. So with the bill review, the whole goal here, the goal is simply, I'm a layperson. I am not a lawyer. Okay, so this is not lawyerly advice in any way whatsoever. Consider it like fatherly advice. But what I'm doing is I'll read the bill, at least in part, and then I'll talk about some of the things that I either like or don't like about a bill. Now, to date, I think I've done like, 20 bills, something like that, over my podcast time. And of those, I think I've come across two. Let me put them up here. Two that I've actually supported. And one of those was a bill by Thomas Massey to end the Department of Education. And the other bill was from Senator Rand Paul, and that was to end no-knock raids. Unfortunately, neither of those bills passed. In fact, I don't even think they've been voted on. But today we're going to talk about 7026. So let me go ahead and pull this up, and let's see what we got here. Let's get this up, and let's see here. Give me just a second, and we will get this bill going. Get this bill review going here. Bam. All right. So there we are. We got this bill up so we can take a look at it. We're just going to walk through a little bit here real quickly and just kind of see what we find. And the purpose of the bill review, again, is just to say, hey, if I can read it and figure out some things that I like or don't like about it, so can you. And we should be reading our bills in order to hold the people that are signing them and passing them accountable. So we look in this bill here, and again, it's 105 pages, but we're going to skip down here to page 11. And this is the first section that I have highlighted here. So here's what it says. It says in section 2, the legislature finds there is a need to comprehensively address the crisis of gun violence, including but not limited to gun violence on school campuses. The legislature intends to address this crisis by providing law enforcement and the courts with the tools to enhance public safety by temporarily restricting firearm possession by a person who is undergoing a mental health crisis and when there is evidence of a threat of violence, and by promoting school safety and enhanced coordination between education and law enforcement entities at the state and local level. So right off the bat, it sounds kind of good for many people. They look at it and they say, hey, there's some gun safety issues out there because people have been killed unjustly so. And there also is a mental health problem. So maybe the state should be the one to go ahead and try to resolve this. However, when we start looking into it, we start seeing that there are a few problems here. So let's go ahead to the next page. And I want you to hold on to this in your mind just a little bit here. This section that we've got over here, this section that we've got here, I want you to hold on to that because we're going to come right back to that. But I wanted to kind of lay the foundation of where we're going here. So let's take a look in on line 331, and this is under the section about powers and duties and obligations. It says this under point K or section K: establish, if the sheriff so chooses, a Coach Aaron Feis, I think it's Feis, guardian program to aid in the prevention or abatement of active assailant incidents on school premises. So if you were listening a moment ago with Hector and I, this is what he was talking about when we were discussing this bill establishes personnel in the school to go ahead and address school violence. So here's what it here, and this is the part where we kind of disagreed a little bit. It says excluded from participating in the Coach Aaron Feis Guardian program are individuals who exclusively perform classroom duties as classroom teachers, as defined in, and then it goes on to reference a different portion of the law. So we're excluding people who are exclusively performing classroom duties as classroom teachers. So teachers, they don't get to be armed. Okay. So right off the bat, I have a problem with this because the teachers are the closest people to the students. If you remember back in your days of school, many times you would have, a very large school and there were different classrooms. And if you're a teacher in one classroom, and you would be separated, physically from teachers in other classrooms, sometimes by a great distance. So if I was a teacher in one classroom and needed to run and get help, or run and help another teacher in another classroom, that could pose a bit of a problem because I'm going to have to leave my room. And now I'm going to have to try to figure out how to quickly get to where I need to be. So I think there's already a problem here because we'll put out some number. I'll put out some numbers here in just a moment. But I think there's already a problem because we've excluded a large portion of people in the school who might wish to be armed. Now, my position is not that teachers should be armed. It is that teachers should be permitted to be armed if they so choose. I'm not going to require anybody to carry a firearm who does not want to. However, I would also not restrict anybody from carrying a firearm who wants to, including teachers. So we move along a little bit here. So now we've already kind of established we've got this program, but we're excluding the people that are closest to the student, because if an active shooter comes into the room, if there's a personnel, a resource officer, an actual officer, or what have you, they may be on the other side of the school. And so now moments matter in this particular case. So let's move along here. We're going to go down to, let's see what's my next section here. Right here, same page. Here's the general requirements. We're not going to get into all the details, but the general requirements say that if you're one of the school guardians, you will need to complete 132 total hours of comprehensive fire safety, arm, and proficiency training conducted by Criminal Justice Standards and Training Commission certified instructors, which must include, and then it goes and lists the specifics of that 132 hours. So I was curious about something. I went and I looked up online, and it appears that there are roughly 4,269 schools in 76 school districts here in Florida. Okay. So imagine that you have one person for each school. Okay. 4,269. Now, those numbers are a little bit on the old side. I think it was like early 2014, 2015, something like that. Number is a little bit old, but I can't imagine that it drastically has changed since then. So we have 4,269 potential people if you have one guardian per school. Okay. And so that comes out to 563,508 billable hours. So somebody is going to be paid over 500,000 hours for training, just for training. So I want to know who's paying for that and who is receiving that money. Right? Because let's be honest, when we're talking about bills, money is always a factor. Okay. It might be in the bill. Unfortunately, this bill was 105 pages. I tried to do a quick search on it for funding and stuff like that, and I didn't see anything that identified who's getting paid. But I find it very interesting that, one, again, school teachers are excluded, but we have now basically created up to somewhere around 4,000 potential positions. Now, each one of those positions, somebody has to get paid. And then that person has to go through 132 hours worth of training. So the training in itself comes out to 500,000 billable hours to some company. Somebody's getting paid. So this is all tax money. Okay. And it sounds good at first, but I'm not so sure. And the reason I'm not so sure is if we move on to page 24, kind of navigate over here, we see we see some interesting things here. And this is we're going to kind of detract a little bit here for a moment. Actually, you know what? Let's move down. I'll come back to that in a minute. Yeah, no, we'll stay there. So on line 678 on page 24, it says a person younger than 21 years of age may not purchase a firearm, the sale or transfer of a firearm to a person younger than 21 years of age. The sale or transfer of a firearm to a person younger than 21 years of age may not be made or facilitated by a licensed importer, licensed manufacturer, or licensed dealer. A person who violates this subsection commits a felony of the third degree, punishable as provided in, so on and so forth. The prohibitions of this subsection do not apply to the purchase of a rifle or shotgun by a law enforcement officer or correctional officer. Now, what I don't know is I don't know the age that would be required for a guardian. All I know is that they have to complete a certain amount of hours. They have to be eligible. And so we're restricting anybody who's younger than 21 from having a firearm. So that and then we're also excluding teachers from being part of this program. However, if somebody is, say, 20 and they're eligible to be part of the program, which I assume they are, then they would be eligible. So the first problem that I have, or one of the many problems that I have with this bill, is that we're saying that, hey, if you're under 21, you're not really capable of having a firearm unless you're a correctional officer or you're some sort of resource officer or what have you. So I think there's a discrepancy there. But then we're also telling teachers, we're saying, hey, if you are in charge of a classroom, you are also ineligible. Okay. And so what we're doing now is we're taking and we're removing people from being eligible to defend our children. We're shrinking the pool of people. Okay. So now you have to be at least 22 to be able to defend the children. And that's for people that are not part of the program. Presuming that this program qualifies as being law enforcement officer or correctional officer. I wasn't quite clear on whether or not it did, but we'll assume that the Guardian program does qualify, falls under there, right? So we're starting to see some discrepancies here. And then we go along and we move down a little bit and we see that it says now they've struck out some things. So they've kind of reworded it a little bit. And it took me a moment to really recognize what they're doing here. But it says a mandatory waiting period is imposed between the purchase and delivery of a firearm. The mandatory waiting period is 3 days, excluding weekends and legal holidays, or expires upon the completion of the records check required under, so on and so forth, which occurs later. So basically, we've got a 3-day waiting period for any firearm. Now, if you look at this closely, it actually seems to have said that there was a 3-day waiting period for a handgun previously, because we see down here, it's struck out on $698, $699 between the purchase and the delivery at retail of any handgun. So now we went from handgun to firearm. There's a waiting period for 3 days. So here's my issue with all of this. And let's go ahead and bring this down. And I'm just going to kind of wind this up here real quick because I don't want to spend too much time on it. So my problem with this is at the very beginning, and I'll go back to the beginning so that I can read it. But at the very beginning, we established that the legislators found a need to comprehensively address the crisis of gun violence. Okay. But then some of the first things they do is they start excluding people to be able to address that. Then it seems like they add this great burden for the people that are permitted to address this. And when I say address this, I mean address it in the moment when it's happening. They've excluded people, and then they've created a barrier for people. And it seems kind of, like that this is just a way to funnel money to somewhere somehow, rather than this more simple answer, which would be to say, look, if you're a teacher, maybe we increase the requirements for being a public school teacher. Maybe what we do instead is we say you go through a rigorous background test or check, and we go through a rigorous mental health check. And then once you've passed that, you're eligible to be a teacher, and you're eligible to carry a firearm if you want it. Because here's the thing, while a lot of people complain and say, well, do you really want teachers carrying? It's not that I want teachers carrying. What I want is people who want to carry to be able to carry. And so and they'll complain and say, but in a school, well, we've already established through this program that carrying a firearm is permissible, right? We've already established that. So that's really a non-issue. It's not a question anymore. We've established it. So now why don't we, rather than creating over 4,000 new jobs and create all this long list of requirements, which is mostly a bunch of training. There's a bit of mental health check, background check there too. But rather than go through all of this and spend all this additional money to have potentially one person in a school, why don't we just back it up and say, hey, we're going to increase the requirements for our school teachers, and then we're going to permit the school teachers to carry if they so choose. And we could even implement some requirements on how the school teachers should manage and maintain their firearms, because clearly we don't want children playing with them. And the thing that I have a problem with here is that some of these don't seem to match up with reality. So for instance, that 3-day waiting period, if you go back, so remember, this is the Marjory Stoneman Douglas High School Public Safety Act, right? This was after the shooting at Marjory Stoneman Douglas. The shooter, Nicholas Cruz, if you look it up on Wikipedia, I'm not going to put it up on the screen, but if you look up on Wikipedia, there was a decade of phone calls about him and his family, a decade. Okay. 2 months prior to the shooting, somebody called into the FBI hotline, and the FBI came back later and said, well, somebody didn't follow protocol. So the interesting thing here is we want to put a 3-day waiting period on any firearm, except for somebody like Nicholas Cruz, who committed the atrocity that this bill is named for, was somebody in the making over a decade. So what is the 3 days going to do? The 3 days isn't going to do. He had a decade to get past any 3-day, any 3-day. And when you start looking at the details of Nicholas Cruz, what you find is that he wasn't addressed by the current things that we have in place. The FBI and the regular police, the local police who received all those phone calls, they dropped the ball left and right. They just kept dropping the ball over and over and over. Yet what this bill does is it creates a burden on the people who are closest to our children to be able to protect them. It creates a burden on people who were unconnected to it. It says, okay, well, you know what? Maybe this one guy who we failed to address, even though we were given tip after tip after tip about this guy, this one guy, he's going to represent the broader majority of people under 21. And so what we're going to do is we're going to restrict them from being able to carry, which should be their right. It is their right. We're going to restrict them because of this one person that we failed, right? So I want to look back here, and I'm reading this, and it says the legislature intends to address this crisis by providing law enforcement and the courts with the tools to enhance public safety. Look, you can't enhance something that you didn't do in the first place. Okay. But enhance public safety by temporarily restricting firearm possession by a person who is undergoing a mental health crisis. Again, you had a decade to deal with this, and you couldn't do it over a decade. Yet the answer is to say, okay, well, we're going to create this new position. It's subject to the sheriff, so it's not even a guaranteed position. But we're going to create this new position, and we're going to potentially employ 4,000, somewhere around there, potentially more people. And then what we're going to do is we're going to put them under a rigorous set of training that they have to undergo. And we're going to tell the people that are closest to the children that they can't protect them. And we're going to tell people that might be in the vicinity that they will not be able to protect them. Because I'm going to tell you right now, I have a 3-year-old son. If my son is in school and I happen to be at work or away somewhere, where I can't get to him, if there's a 20-year-old person who's carrying and there's an active shooter, I would hope that 20-year-old would be willing to go in there and defend all of the children, because I don't really care how old the person is. All I care is that my child comes home safely. And I'm willing to bet that most parents feel the same way. So I think the problems with this bill is that it doesn't really address what I think of as the core problem, at least on the basis of this particular event. In this particular event was that that our current government dropped the ball. They failed. And this bill doesn't come back and say, all right, here's what we're going to do to fix where we failed. What it does instead is it says, okay, well, there was this failure. There was this big issue. So now what we're going to do is we're going to create additional rules upon the members of a society, even though it was our failing. And I'm willing to bet that any laws that come out of the Uvalde shooting are going to be similar. The Uvalde shooting was even in a worse atrocity, not only in the sense that we had I think it was 19 children, toddlers, like elementary school kids were killed, but you had a police force that just, they might as well not even have been there, except for the fact that they restrained parents who would have otherwise went in to try to defend their children. And so likely any bill that comes out, I'm willing to bet, and I'll be looking for it and I will do a bill review on it, but I'm willing to bet that it's not going to address the problems with that department. And we see this time and time again with bills. So this is one of the reasons why I oppose this bill. I've opposed it ever since. I oppose it now. And if Hector Roos, who was on a few moments ago, does get elected governor, I will definitely be holding his feet to the fire in order to get it repealed. But I think what we need to start doing is we need to start reading some of these bills, and we don't have to have a law degree. We can just simply read them and say, this doesn't make sense from a lay perspective, because at the end of the day, this bill doesn't affect only lawyers. It affects you and I. So we should take the time and just sit down and read these bills. With that, that's the end of my bill review. That's the end of this episode of Friendly Fire. So I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you enjoyed having Hector on, and to see for additional videos for this episode or past episode, I want you to head on over to youtube.libertydad.com. I want you to hit the subscribe button. Make sure you hit that ring the bell button, and then be sure to connect with me at Liberty Dad on Facebook, Liberty Dad on Twitter, or send me an email or hate mail to libertydadpodcast@gmail.com, because I would love to hear from you. And remember, if you're a champion of liberty, your business is people and your product is liberty. Have a great week. Catch you next time. And I'm out as soon as I figure out how to hit this button.